Hello all, how are you all doing today? My name is Emily, and as you've probably noticed in the past week, my content and posting has been a bit weird. So for those of you who maybe watch my channel a bit more closely, last Monday on the death anniversary of Ian Curtis, I posted a video about his biopic. It was more of a video essay, very different from a lot of my other content. And it was so difficult to make. I think it took me about 3 hours to make the first 3 minutes. Just a massive creative challenge, one of the hardest things I've ever done. Because something I've been exploring on this channel is maybe making more video essay-like videos. But of course, a byproduct of that is that whenever I post a big video like that, that is very effort intensive, different editing and filming and planning, I am just so exhausted afterwards. So after last week's video, I just had to take a break from filming or doing anything YouTube for a while. And this happened with my Little Women video as well. I just had to take a break for like a week or so, week and a half. I just need a rest so I can sort of decompress, get myself out of video essay mode and get back into our regularly scheduled normal content. But I do want to thank everyone who has watched those videos, commented on them with your lovely, lovely words, and also left a like. BookTube is my bedrock content, but I am particularly proud of those videos that I have put all of my heart and soul and creativity into. But for right now, and in the near future, we are going to be back to our normal BookTube content. So today I want to review Five Dark Fates, which is the last book in the Three Dark Crowns quartet by Kendare Blake. So if you've been watching my channel for a bit, you know that I stan this series on this channel. I say it all the time, but this is one of my favorite fantasy series in the last few years. I think it's criminally underrated on BookTube. I don't think anyone talks about it enough. A lot of YA fantasy is labeled dark, but this is a series that is actually dark. Like Six of Crows was a fine fantasy, a wonderful character-driven story, but it wasn't actually dark. This series is actually dark. Throughout the first 3 books, I've always been so in awe of how Kendare Blake has been so willing to really explore political intrigue and the dark sides of particular magic systems. She doesn't hold back on how messed up court intrigue can be and how more messed up it can be when you introduce a lot of magical factions and ill intentions. And a lot of YA series don't really explore themes and really take them to interesting places in the same way that this series does. This series is pretty violent in its way, but not in a way that's too excessive or violent for the sake of violence. And we also just have really wonderful characters, really great main characters, but also really interesting side characters carrying out their own plans and schemes. So I've always loved getting lost in this series and getting constantly shocked by the twists and turns that this story takes. So of course I was so excited to read this 4th and final book. I'm going to get into spoilers in this review, but I'm going to have a short non-spoilery section here. So in case you haven't read the other books in the Three Dark Crowns series, this series takes place on an island queendom called Fenburn. Every generation, each queen gives birth to a set of 3 triplet girls, and when those girls turn 16, they must fight to the death for the queendom. Each of these triplets is associated with one of the main magical factions of the island. We have the 3 main ones, the poisoners, the elementals, and the naturalists, but we also have other potential gifts like the war gift or the oracle gift. And in this series, we focused on these 3 sisters, Mirabella, Katherine, and Arsinoe. And we watch their journey through this competition as they are pressured by external political forces, but also dealing with their own internal conflict about this whole situation. And of course, in this final book, we had the culmination of that struggle. I thought the book was amazingly, beautifully written. Kendare Blake always fleshes out this world amazingly. And each book in this series consistently has this feature where the beginning, about 100 to 200 pages or so, are quite slow. She loves to slowly move each piece into place. And I personally had come to terms with that about her writing, and I was okay with that. I personally always enjoy watching all the set pieces move into place, seeing how all the politics really work in this world. And I also love that opportunity to become become acquainted or reacquainted again with each character. So all that stuff was amazing. And there were some genuinely shocking moments in this book, and I love that stuff. And this ultimately culminated in kind of a messy ending where things weren't very tied up very tidily, which I can respect because I think too many YA series tie things up too neatly in the end. On the other hand, I'm not sure that messiness necessarily served the story or the themes or the character arcs. And I think the book forced us to focus on characters who I felt didn't add very much to the plot. So really, I came away conflicted because I respect that Kendare Blake doesn't owe us a neat ending and was willing to give us something that was messy and a bit open. But on the other end, I felt some character moments and character endings were just not earned. So while I get that sometimes endings are messy and that's how it is sometimes, I felt that this was taken to a degree with some characters where it wasn't quite satisfying. So I don't think I can go any further without going into spoiler territory, so let's get into the spoiler section of this video. So before we cut to the chase with character arcs and endings and so forth, let's establish the theme that Kendare Blake was setting up throughout the story. So throughout the story, I saw Kendare Blake as setting up this arc where these sisters didn't eventually have to kill each other. Like, they had been pitted against each other all their lives, and finally there was this opportunity where they just didn't have to do that, or at least I thought we were going to be given that. And the story really was leading up to that. We saw those sisters coming together and having these moments together and having really heartfelt character moments together. And I love watching their relationships get fleshed out because this story is ultimately about sisterhood. Now let's talk about it. Mirabella. So it was heavily hinted at in the previous book and in this book that Mirabella might have to be a sacrifice in order to get rid of this mist that was this Lovecraftian fog that was attacking the island. Because we knew from the story of the Blue Queen and Queen Daphne that Ilian, the Blue Queen, was an elemental sacrifice so that the mist could be created to protect Fenburn. So I had kind of anticipated, okay, maybe Mirabella is going to sacrifice herself to get rid of the mist, or maybe she will have to be a sacrifice. I didn't want her to die because she and Katherine are my two favorite sisters. I don't really care about Arsinoe. I think she's just bland. So how she dies is that Katherine has these dead queens living inside of her, and they can possess her and give her their abilities. But they can sense Mirabella's power, and so they try to leak out of her and into Mirabella when they weaken her by stabbing her. But her death just felt so needless. It didn't accomplish anything. She didn't get rid of the mist by dying, and it just felt so unearned for her. And she also just died without ceremony and just like that. And this was just not fitting for her because I really loved reading about Mirabella in these books. I loved how level-headed and rational she could be. I loved that she was so powerful and yet had so much internal conflict about her sisters, and she was the one who cared the most about her sisterly relationship to these two other girls. So I felt like she went out without ceremony, but I was like, okay, well, maybe we have hope for these two other sisters. Like maybe Katherine and Arsinoe can come together in memory of their sister. But then Katherine also died, also by falling off of something, and I was... Let's talk about Katherine. Katherine is my favorite sister of the three, like my favorite sister. I always thought she got a raw deal. Like, she was a girl who should have been a naturalist but was thrown in with the poisoners because there was a whole switch with Arsinoe and Katherine where one was a poisoner and one was a naturalist, but they got switched into the different factions. So Katherine grew up thinking like, oh, I'm just a terrible poisoner. I don't belong here. And imposter syndrome has just followed her throughout her life. Like, she thought she was bad at being a poisoner. She thought she was a weak queen. And then eventually when she was thrown into the Brechia domain, I think that's how you say it, she was thrown down into that pit and was possessed by these dead queens. And when she was crowned in the second book, she sort of had to live with the fact that she had borrowed gifts from these ghosts. Like, she had powers that weren't really her own, and also basically her body was entirely poisoned, so she couldn't even bear the triplets, which is one of the roles of the queen. So I always loved how she became a badass despite all these internal conflicts and feelings of inferiority. And some people aren't really fans of her in the second and third book, but I really identified with how vicious she had to become in order to push past all of these things that were in her way. I love a morally gray character, and Katherine was that for me. I have been rooting for her all this time. And she just went out without ceremony. She just sacrificed herself again. And that was also just so quick, just like that. So the queen that we're left with is Arsinoe, who I've said before I don't like that much. To me, she's always just been that archetypal tomboy princess, and I never felt like she had anything else compelling to offer the story. She just always felt like that very typical YA female character who's just really spunky and hot-headed all the time and really reckless, when I just felt like she was always the person who was screwing things up all the time and just messing people's plans up, and I just got so sick of her. I always get sick of her in every book. And also in this book they kept saying, oh, well, no one can do low magic like Arsinoe. And I was like, well, since when was Arsinoe that powerful? I mean, I always thought she learned low magic from Madrigal, Jules's mom, her friend Jules's mom. But suddenly she's supposed to be super, super good at low magic, which I get that she was doing it bit by bit in the other books. But I never got the idea that she was always super powerful or super adept at it. Is that just me? So basically, Kendare Blake killed off my two favorite sisters and left me with the one I liked least. And on top of that, Jules. Let's talk about Jules. Like, I never disliked Jules. Her whole thing in the first book was that she had a romantic arc with Joseph, who died in the second book. But then we find out that Jules is Legion cursed, which means she has more than one ability. So she's a naturalist and she's also war gifted. But usually these individuals are very hard to control, and they go insane, and usually they're killed off at birth. So basically in the third book there was this queen making plot, right? Where this girl called Amelia, who, by the way, I really wanted to die. Why couldn't she die? Like, seriously, screw her. I hated how she interacted with the other characters. Like, she was just so in love with Jules to the detriment of her relationships and interactions with everyone else. Like, she was always just so unnecessarily rude to everybody and just so annoying, and I was really hoping she would die. Like, of all characters who ought to die, like, it should have been her, but she didn't. And she also got to live, so that's another insult to injury. But Jules was being pushed forward in a queen making plot. I was okay with it, but I always thought that was kind of a distraction and just more engineered conflict that was being introduced to put pressure on the main plot of the three sisters. It turned out that the whole Legion Queen thing was legitimate, and now she's going to actually be the queen, and she's going to be some sort of new kind of queen. And that was just so unrewarding because I didn't care about Jules and her whole Legion Queen thing. The only way in which I cared about it was how it related to our three sisters. Like, also, Jules eventually cuts her Legion curse free. Like, Arsinoe worked to bind it, but then she frees it in order to win the war. But then in the end, she's just okay. Like, the Legion curse is just gone. Like, the whole crazed state that she goes into is just okay. Like, that just poofs away, and Katherine can't do anything similar to exorcise the queens out. That just really bugged me a lot. And Arsinoe is the surviving queen, so I didn't understand why she couldn't continue the line. Like, they followed all the rules, right? The three queens went to war with each other, and two died and one survived. So I don't know why she's just abandoning that duty. Instead, she abandons that to go to the mainland to get Billy back. So Billy in this book had the revelation that his dad was killed by people working for the poisoners. But I seriously don't pity him because he killed Natalia and I loved Natalia, and that's a whole other thing. So Billy just left Arsinoe behind because he needed to go take care of business on the mainland, and it seemed like he was breaking up with her. And so she's going to go get her guy back. Like, I already didn't like Arsinoe that much, but isn't that kind of a disservice to her for her to just want to get her man back? Like, the book was setting her up to be this real badass, so why can't she just take this moment to be a badass? So basically, this book made us focus on the two characters that were frankly the blandest ones, the least interesting ones, and killed off the two interesting characters who I felt were the best parts of this series. And I think this really messes with the overall theme that this book was going for. We had these three sisters that were part of this really brutal system that had been carried out for generation after generation, and this was the generation that had the chance to change that. But I felt like this was not the change that we really earned. Like, yes, Mirabella and Katherine died partly because of choices that they made, but I felt that it was mostly due to things that were out of their control. And also that whole thing with the mist and the Blue Queen, I didn't feel like that wrapped up particularly well, because it turned out the elemental queen dying doesn't fix it. So it seemed that Mirabella and Katherine had to die and join the mist and kill the dead queens. But we spent so much time with that story in the previous book, with Arsinoe kind of having these visions through Daphne's eyes. But I didn't feel like that paid off particularly well. It wasn't what the lore even told us that was how it worked. Like, it's really not satisfying when we spend so much time with this particular part of the lore and then we don't pay it off. Like, the mist was not supposed to be rational or anything like that, but in the end it's turned into something benevolent because Mirabella and Katherine are part of it and it's necessary to kill the dead queens. I think some of this lore and how this island works just felt very inconsistent at the end. And then back to our main theme, we didn't have our sisters coming together and ultimately healing the island, because that was what Mirabella wanted. It was for the three sisters to each have their different roles and to come together, and they could break the system together. Like I've been saying, authors don't owe us very neat and predictable endings, but I felt like this particular ending was messy in such a way that it broke a lot of things that we were building up to. I feel like this ending was messy in such a way that it not only made a lot of lore inconsistent, but it also made a lot of character arcs quite unsatisfying in the end. Like, oh, Katherine, I really wanted her to ultimately be happy in the end and be healed from all the stuff she went through in childhood, because she has just had such a hard life and she deserved some happiness. And Mirabella trying so hard to unite her family, but then ultimately failing, that feels unearned. And Arsinoe with her whole vision with Daphne and Ilian and all those dreams that she was having, I didn't feel like that added much to her character arc. I didn't see her being impacted much by that. So of course there were a lot of things I still liked about this book. I loved the writing, political intrigue, and I loved being able to spend time with my favorite characters for the last time, you know, before they died. And of course we got some nice twists and turns that Kendare Blake always loves giving us. But ultimately, a lot of these endings and character endings were not earned. This ending essentially reneged on a lot of the groundwork that was set up in the previous books. And of course, for me personally, my two favorite characters died, and I was forced to spend time with all of the characters that I liked the least. So as much as I really wanted to love this book, I, enjoyed certain aspects of it, but other aspects of it really frustrated me. So to me, this didn't quite stick the landing for me as I wish it did. I will always enjoy my memories of reading the previous three books and how much they really thrilled me and filled me with enjoyment. As a whole, I would still recommend this series as one that goes places that not many other YA series are willing to go. I think it's got amazing magic, amazing world building that every YA fantasy series should aspire to. And for the most part, there are some really compelling characters, and through them you get to explore these conflicts that all leaders go through. That conflict between their internal struggles and internal interests and personal ones. So the conflict between that and these external forces, the political expectations and all of these maneuvers that are going up against them. So I love these aspects of the series, but this ending, not quite as satisfying as I would have wanted. So I hope you enjoyed this review. I'm aware that this was a bit rambly and messy. I had just been mulling over this book for a few days and I just really wanted to get all of these thoughts out of my system. But in the comments, if you have read this entire series, if you've read this book, how did you like this book? Did you love it? Did you really hate it? Just let me know down below. Like this video if you liked it. If you're not already subscribed to my channel, please do if you like my content. In the meantime, you can follow me on Instagram and Goodreads and Twitter, and I will see you in my next video.